Hey, Holy Girls, welcome back to Holy Girl Talk. You're a returning listener. Thank you so much for coming back and spending this time with me again. Truly, I never take it lightly that you're here. And if this is your very first episode, welcome. I'm really glad you found your way here. Holy Girl Talk is a space where we talk about God, scripture, womanhood, healing, fear, courage, and real life in a way that's honest and human. You don't need perfect faith to be here. You don't need to have everything figured out. You're welcome exactly as you are. Before we get into today's episode, I want to say this. If while you're listening, you think of a friend who's standing on the edge of something new, someone who's nervous, unsure, or feeling called into a season they didn't expect, please share this episode with them. Send it to the girl who's starting a new job, moving to a new city, stepping into leadership, deepening her faith, or becoming a new version of herself. You never know how God might use this conversation to encourage someone right when they need it. Today we're talking about Joshua, and if you've never heard his story before, that's completely okay. I'll walk you through it. Joshua's story is found in the Old Testament, and it centers around a man who is suddenly called to lead an entire nation after the death of Moses, one of the most respected, powerful leaders in Scripture. Joshua didn't ask for this role. He didn't campaign for it. He didn't feel ready for it. But God chose him anyway. And that's why this story matters so much, because so many of us are stepping into things we didn't feel prepared for, roles we didn't expect, responsibilities we didn't plan, callings that feel bigger than our confidence. Joshua's story is not about having it all together, it's about learning how to trust God when you don't. This episode is for the women who feel the weight of what's next. The ones who know something is changing, something is calling them forward, but fear keeps whispering, what if you're not enough? What if you mess this up? What if you fail? Joshua's life reminds us that stepping into your God-given calling doesn't require you to be fearless. It requires you to be willing. So if you're standing at the edge of something new, uncertain, or uncomfortable, this episode is for you. Let's get into it. So let's set the scene for Joshua's story, especially if you've never heard it before. Joshua had spent years serving under Moses. Moses was the leader everyone trusted, the one God spoke to directly, the one who parted the Red Sea, the one whose presence alone brought confidence to the people. And then suddenly, Moses dies. And just like that, the stability Joshua had known is gone. God turns to Joshua and says, now it's your turn. And I want you to really sit with that for a second. Joshua is not stepping into something small. He's being asked to lead millions of people into land they've never occupied, to fulfill promises that have been waiting generations to be completed. This isn't a gradual transition. This is a full, overwhelming shift. One day he's assisting, the next day he's responsible. And that kind of transition hits emotionally before it hits practically. There's grief, there's pressure, there's comparison, there's the unspoken question of, can I really do this the way he did? And that's so relatable because many of us step into roles where the expectations already exist. We inherit standards, legacies, responsibilities that weren't created with us in mind. Think about modern life, stepping into a leadership role at work when the person before you was beloved, becoming the strong one in your family when things fall apart. Entering a new season where people suddenly look to you for answers you don't feel like you have yet. That weight is real. Joshua didn't feel qualified. He felt the pressure of filling shoes that were never meant to be his. And that's the mistake we often make. Thinking our calling requires us to become a replica of someone else. But God never asked Joshua to be Moses. He asked Joshua to be obedient. This section of the story reminds us that calling often arrives before confidence. And that doesn't mean you're unprepared. It means you're human. When God speaks to Joshua after Moses' death, the very first thing he says is not a strategy. It's not a plan. It's not instructions. God says, do not be afraid. And that alone tells us so much. God doesn't say that because Joshua is fearless. He says it because Joshua is afraid. Fear doesn't surprise God. Fear doesn't disqualify Joshua. Fear is simply acknowledged and then addressed. This is such an important shift for how we think about courage. Courage is not the absence of fear. Courage is choosing obedience, even while fear is present. Joshua feels the weight of responsibility, the pressure of leadership, the uncertainty of what's ahead, and God meets him right there. Not by removing the fear, but by telling him how to move through it. And this feels so relevant for modern life. We often tell ourselves, I'll move once I feel ready. I'll say yes once I'm confident. I'll step forward once the fear goes away. But Joshua's story shows us that readiness often comes after obedience, not before it. Fear shows up when you're starting something new, when you're stepping into leadership, when you're changing your life, when you're trusting God in a deeper way than before. That doesn't mean you're off track, it means you're at the edge of something meaningful. God repeats the instruction multiple times: be strong and courageous. Not because Joshua forgot, but because courage is something you have to choose again and again. It's a daily decision, a moment by moment commitment to trust God more than your insecurities. So, if fear is present in your life right now, let this be reassuring. Fear doesn't mean you're not called, it often means you are. After telling Joshua not to be afraid, God gives him something far more grounding than a motivational speech. He gives him a promise. God says, I will be with you wherever you go. And that right there is the foundation of Joshua's calling. Not confidence in himself, not experience, not perfection, presence. God doesn't tell Joshua, you've got this because you're strong enough. He tells him, you've got this because I'm with you. And that distinction matters because confidence based on self will always have limits, but confidence rooted in God's presence is steady. This is such a shift from how we're taught to move in modern life. We're told to be self-made, self-assured, self-reliant, to trust our gut, to believe in ourselves. But Joshua's story invites us into something deeper, trusting the God who goes before us, stands beside us, and stays with us. Presence means you're not walking into unknown territory alone. It means when you don't know what to say, God does. When you don't know how to lead, God guides. When you don't feel strong enough, God supplies strength. And for so many of us, the fear isn't that we can't do the thing, it's that we'll have to do it alone. Joshua's story directly confronts that fear. Purpose is never pursued solo. Calling always comes with companionship. So if you're waiting to feel confident before you move, this is your reminder. You don't need more confidence. You need more trust. Trust that God's presence is enough to sustain you, step by step. One of the most challenging parts of Joshua's story is not the size of the calling. It's the way God asks him to obey. Because once Joshua steps into leadership, God gives instructions that don't always make sense on paper. They're not logical, they're not efficient, they don't follow the rules of strategy or common sense. And Joshua obeys anyway. God tells him to move people forward before circumstances change, to follow directions that don't come with explanations, to trust outcomes he can't yet see. And that kind of obedience is uncomfortable, because obedience without clarity requires surrender. It means releasing the need to understand everything before you move. This is where modern faith gets tested, because we like plans, we like timelines, we like confirmation, we like guarantees. We want God to show us the full picture before we take the step. But Joshua's story teaches us that calling often unfolds one instruction at a time. Think about how this shows up in real life. Staying when you want to quit, leaving when it would be easier to stay, saying yes when you don't feel ready, saying no when it would be more comfortable to agree. Obedience rarely feels convenient. It often feels risky. And yet Joshua's obedience is precise. He doesn't half follow. He doesn't adjust God's instructions to make them more comfortable. He trusts that God's methods are just as important as God's promises. This section of the story is a reminder that faith is not just believing God can do something, it's trusting Him enough to do it His way, even when that way doesn't make sense yet. This brings us to one of the most powerful moments in Joshua's story, the crossing of the Jordan River. And this part is so important because it shows us how faith actually works in real life. The Israelites are standing in front of the Jordan River at flood stage. The water is high, the current is strong, there is no visible path forward. And God tells Joshua that the priests carrying the ark are to step into the river first, not after the waters part, not once it's safe, but before anything changes. And this is where faith gets uncomfortable. Because we like evidence before movement, we want reassurance before obedience, we want the waters to part, then we'll step forward. But God flips the order. He waits for movement before the miracle. The priests step into the water and then the river stops flowing. Then the path opens. Then the people cross on dry ground. And this is such a clear message for us. Sometimes God is waiting on your step before he reveals the solution. Sometimes the clarity comes after obedience. Sometimes the breakthrough doesn't happen until your feet touch the water. Think about how this shows up in modern life. Applying for the job before you feel fully qualified. Starting the business before you feel confident. Moving forward in faith before you have every answer. Having the hard conversation. Setting the boundary. Saying yes to the calling even though you're scared. Joshua's story shows us that faith is active. It moves. It risks. It steps forward, even when the outcome isn't guaranteed. And God honors that movement. Not recklessness, obedience. Not impulse, trust. So if you're standing at the edge of something right now, waiting for the waters to part first, this part of the story gently challenges you. What if God is asking you to step first? What if the path appears because you moved? After crossing the Jordan, Joshua and the people come face to face with Jericho. And Jericho is not just another city, it's fortified, intimidating, and strategically placed. In other words, it looks impossible. This is the kind of obstacle that makes you question whether you heard God correctly in the first place. And then God gives Joshua a strategy that makes absolutely no sense from a human perspective. March around the city once a day for 6 days. On the seventh day, march around it 7 times. Blow the trumpets, shout, and that's it. No weapons, no force, no battle plan that would impress a military expert. And Joshua obeys. This part of the story is such a reminder that many battles in life are not won by striving harder. They're won by trusting deeper. Jericho doesn't fall because the people are stronger than the walls. It falls because they are obedient, consistent, and willing to worship even when nothing appears to be changing. And let's be honest, this is where faith feels frustrating. Because obedience without immediate results can feel pointless. Marching in silence day after day looks foolish. People probably questioned it. Some likely felt discouraged. But this is so relevant for modern life. Sometimes God asks you to keep showing up even when you don't see progress. To keep praying, to keep doing the right thing, to keep trusting Him in situations where nothing. Jericho teaches us that faithfulness is powerful, that obedience compounds, that consistency matters, and that God's ways may not look impressive. The walls fall not because the people pushed harder, but because they trusted longer. One of the most freeing truths in Joshua's story is this: Joshua was never meant to be Moses, and God never asked him to be. From the very beginning, God speaks to Joshua directly. He gives him specific instructions. He builds a personal relationship with him, and that's intentional, because comparison is one of the quickest ways to weaken your calling. If Joshua had spent his leadership trying to imitate Moses, he would have missed the unique way God wanted to work through him. And this hits close to home for so many of us. We look at women who came before us, women who seem more confident, more gifted, more experienced, more established. We measure our beginning against someone else's middle, and then we wonder why we feel insecure. But God never called Joshua to be a sequel. He called him to be himself, strong, courageous, obedient, and present. Joshua's leadership style was different. His journey was different. His challenges were different. And that didn't make him less qualified. It made him perfectly positioned. This is such an important reminder for women today. Your calling is not a copy. It's not a remix. It's not a watered down version of someone else's life. It's original. It's specific. It's intentional. And comparison only clouds the clarity of what God is asking you to do. Joshua's confidence didn't come from imitation, it came from obedience. And the same is true for us. When you stop trying to measure up and start trusting God's design for your life, everything shifts. As Joshua grows into his calling, something really important happens. He develops emotional steadiness. Not because fear disappears, and not because everything suddenly becomes easy, but because he learns how to lead with fear instead of being led by it. Joshua's life shows us that calling is not one big, courageous moment. It's a daily choice, a repeated decision to trust God again today, even if you trusted Him yesterday, to obey again today, even if yesterday was hard, to show up again today, even when you're tired, uncertain, or unsure how things will turn out. And this is such a necessary reminder because we often think calling is supposed to feel exciting all the time, purpose-driven, energizing, clear. But the truth is, calling is often quiet, routine, unseen. It looks like consistency, discipline, faithfulness when no one is clapping for you. Joshua leads through uncertainty. He navigates pressure, he makes decisions without guarantees. And instead of letting fear make him reactive, he lets trust make him steady. That's emotional maturity, that's leadership, that's growth. For modern life, this looks like continuing to show up even when you don't feel confident yet. It looks like choosing obedience over comfort. It looks like trusting God not just in the big moments, but in the ordinary ones. Calling isn't proven by how bold you feel, it's proven by how faithful you are. Joshua reminds us that strength is not loud, courage is not flashy, and leadership is not about having all the answers. It's about staying anchored in God when you don't. If you're listening to this and you're standing at the edge of something new, I want you to know this episode was for you. New doesn't always feel exciting. Sometimes it feels heavy. Sometimes it feels lonely. Sometimes it feels like everyone else thinks you're ready. But inside you're thinking, I don't know if I can do this. Joshua's story reminds you that feeling unprepared does not mean you're uncalled. I want you to reflect on this gently. Where is God asking you to move forward, even though you're scared? What river are you standing in front of right now, waiting for it to part before you step? What Jericho feels impossible, intimidating, or too big for you? And what would it look like to trust God's presence instead of waiting for confidence? If fear has been loud in your life lately, let this be reassuring. God doesn't tell Joshua to be brave because he's fearless. He tells him to be brave because fear is present and God is bigger. Courage is not a personality trait. It's a decision you make again and again to trust God one step at a time. And if this episode resonated with you, or if you thought of someone while listening, please share it. Send it to the friend who's starting over, the woman stepping into leadership, the girl who's quietly wondering if she's strong enough for what God is calling her to do. You never know how God might use this conversation to remind someone they're not alone. Thank you, Holy Girls, for spending this time with me today. Thank you for showing up, for listening with open hearts, and for choosing faith even when it feels uncomfortable. If you'd like to send in prayer requests, testimonies, or episode suggestions, you can email holygirltalkpodcast@gmail.com. And if you haven't already, make sure you're following Holy Girl Talk so you don't miss future episodes like this one. I'm praying that you step forward with courage this week, that you trust God's presence more than your fear, and that you remember the same God who called Joshua is the God who walks with you. Until next time, Holy Girls, keep moving forward.